to let in the online attendees. Thanks for everyone's flexibility and being able to reschedule this at short notice. We did not have quorum last time I was sick, and so that would feel better. Although disappointing for the Patriots, but we'll be back. Let's jump into it. First, we have, I guess we'll take the roll. We have Councillor Flynn, who's joining us now in lieu of Councillor Tabor. So welcome, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you.
Mayor McEachern?
Here.
Assistant Mayor Kelly? Here. Councillor Flynn?
Here.
Councillor Cook?
Here.
And then we first on the agenda have the approval of the April 4th, 2025 minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
Thanks for great minutes, as always, Jane.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, we'll pass it over to Jane to review the city's legislative principles. These are adopted every year ahead of, well, not ahead of the session, but so that we can take positions on bills when we do not have the opportunity to bring them on up to legislative subcommittee for a formal vote. As long as they substantially conform to the legislative principles, we will support or oppose bills that come before the House, Senate.
So, thank you, Mayor. So we have our legislative principles were last amended in 2022. So they have remained the same since then. Most all of you are familiar with the process. We adopt these principles. We entitle it on the document legislative positions, but really I can call them legislative principles, so that we can submit testimony without having meetings to discuss each of these particular topics. So I had the, I was able to review the city council's goals that were just in the last meeting. And I had actually 3 suggestions perhaps, if the committee wants to consider amending these. For paragraph 7, what it reads currently is support incentives for sustainability and increasing energy efficiency and increasing renewable energy production. In light of the city council's goals, I am suggesting that it reads, it's amended to read as follows: to support policies that encourage resiliency and sustainability, protect, enhance, and preserve the natural and built environment, and increase energy efficiency and renewable energy production. So you're wrapping in sustainability, you're wrapping in resiliency,
Yeah,
all that stuff.
I think that's a great thing.
So.
Do we need to make a motion for that?
Sure, yeah.
I would make that motion, Jane.
Okay.
A second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Great. The second suggestion is 21. It would be brand new. So 21 would be a legislative principle that would state, quote, support legislation that expands the development, availability, and affordability of childcare.
Nice. Yeah.
Another banger.
Where were you at a retreat, Jane?
Okay, great. So want to have a motion on that as well, perhaps?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Great. And then the last suggestion is another new one, which would be 22, support legislation that supports public transportation. Not a lot of those bills, but that seems to be something that's integral to workforce housing.
Great. Make that motion.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Now we have the legislative principles as presented, as amended.
I think
Councilor Cook.
Your Honor, I'd like to propose an additional legislative principle. And I wanted to have a discussion around this. Specifically, I'm thinking about something around supports policies that protect local, small businesses or local businesses. And I'm specifically thinking about the loss of the Council on the Arts and how that's impacting a lot of our businesses and nonprofit, a lot of our nonprofits taking a real hit because they're not getting grants now because of the funding for the Council on the Arts disappearing. And so this would give us the opportunity to advocate for return of funding for the arts at the state level, for the Council on the Arts or for some other mechanism for funding it. There were a lot of local grants that were lost.
Sure. Any other discussion?
Just to clarify, what is it again?
Support policies that, or support, I should say, policies or legislation
That restore or
that supports local businesses and nonprofits. That is really broad,
Mhm.
but I don't know what other attacks we're gonna wait to see against other entities. And so I didn't wanna limit it because there is also some legislation that eliminates nonprofit deductions. I don't know if you've seen this. There's legislation that eliminates tax deductions for nonprofits for property. So I think we have to be mindful. It might not just be the arts.
Okay. I'd second that.
And just to restate that it's supporting,
Legislation that supports local businesses and nonprofits.
easy enough?
Yeah.
So that's motioned and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed?
All right, thank you. And so what I'll do is
Right, so we have to approve these as,
approve them as amended.
can we make that motion?
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
The only thing that stood out, and I think it's just the language, are they still referring to donor town concept, or is that a little, do people still use that
I
language?
think we like the lay folk
Everyone
when
knows
we're-
what it means and,
everyone who's in on the game.
okay,
Yes, it's a bit of an antiquated phrase, you're right, but it's kind of shorthand for the concept.
yes, got it, thank you.
Do we have a motion to adopt the legislative principles as amended?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed?
So great, so we can get that on the next city council meeting. Do you want me to put it under one of your names and you can introduce it on behalf of the legislative subcommittee?
Sure.
Or something coming from the city
Sure.
manager?
You can put it on mine. That's fine. Under mine.
Okay,
I just
great.
mumbled that together.
That's great. And then just for review purposes, I just put the testimony policy. We haven't looked at that, we haven't changed that very much, and it's basically common sense. You know, you folks can testify on legislative positions. Anyone can testify on any legislative position on behalf of themselves, obviously, and you would indicate that through your testimony. But on behalf of the city, you know, we typically will have the mayor go, but on occasion, other members of the committee would go as well. The other, we sometimes, and we used to do this much more in the past, we might delegate particular staff members that have an area of expertise on a particular bill to go and submit testimony. I'm thinking of the water and the energy bills. Oftentimes we used to have some staff support testimony. And then any state association or professional boards, they have oftentimes their own lobbyists, so members of staff that are members of those boards are able to participate in that testimony on behalf of those boards and commissions. Also, we have various coalitions. I think you just looked at, Suzanne presented, Woodland presented at the last city council meeting, the coalition relative to the Great Bay, and obviously Nathan here is the new chair of the Education Coalition Communities 2.0. So we also submit testimony to the legislature through these various coalitions. And then when we haven't identified a legislative principle and we're between meetings, then we go to the mayor and we review it with the mayor and he's able to submit on behalf of the city. So I thought it important to dust these off and just remind everyone. And probably we should submit these along with the amended legislative principles also.
Any discussion on the legislative subcommittee's procedure for submission of testimony? Councilor Cook?
I've been signing in on a lot of bills, and one thing that I realized, the challenge with the sign-in procedure is it asks you who you are. Are you an elected official? And
True.
in the past, I always put I was just a citizen for myself, and then I realized that that's really not true. So I put that I'm an elected official, but I say that I'm speaking for myself, not for.
That's great.
That's what I've done, yeah.
Yeah, because this is a challenge, because you're not really, you don't want to be identified as speaking for the city. So,
And some of the bills have really some of the bills I think we're speaking on or signing in for don't really have any direct correlation with our legislative policies and or, the broader city potential opinion. You know what I mean? Like bike fees.
yeah, bike fees, vaccines, eliminated
Yes.
vaccine mandates,
Yes.
things like that.
All right, I'll wait a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Second? Oh, Michelle.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you very much. And now, just to sum up some of the bills that we've registered in support of and already provided testimony so far, the mayor went and testified in favor of Senate Bill 634, the hotel occupancy. Unfortunately, that was ITL'd, but every year it gets dusted off and we keep trying. I don't know, Mayor, if you have any comments on that?
Just that they have, I think the senator from Manchester, Victoria Sullivan, was in that committee meeting noting in great affirmation of the all the money that we received. It was later pointed out to me that she was a sponsor of the bill
Oh,
that would look to further reduce the state funding to Portsmouth by, I think it was 2/3. Or
the meals and
70
rooms.
The meals and rooms. So I don't expect this to go further. There did seem to be one of the senators up there, I'm forgetting his name, Republican representing Conway, that recognizes the pressure that they're under in Conway specifically, and the links in that kind of Upper Valley region. But the idea that it's going to happen this is not this session is not likely.
Thank you.
Question?
Yes, I'm sorry. Mayor, were there other mayors there testifying from?
No, sometimes there's more of a concerted effort. This one was unlikely to pass from the jump, and so sometimes last year there was more of a focus on directing these funds to first responders. That was not included in the language here, I think, to the detriment of the bill. But there's at times more. It doesn't necessarily. I think we've had broader support of the chamber in the past because we dedicated to things like tourism. I think that's unlikely to. I mean, we already support the chamber, so I mean, maybe if we took our support of the chamber and tied it to in the budgetary context and tied it to this, we might get their support. But I don't see. There wasn't a huge. This is not something that comes up on the mayor's roundtable discussions. There's kind of split opinions on it, and I haven't been able to connect with Mr. Rouet from Manchester, who was. He would need to support this in order to get the Republicans on board.
Thank you.
Great. And the Education Coalition Communities 2.0. Nathan, on behalf of the coalition, submitted written testimony on 2 bills last week, and that's in your packet. House Bill 1800 and House Bill 1787. We have the coalition objected on those bills, just a particular provision of those bills, not the whole thing, because they have a narrow scope and mission, and both those bills would have SWEP paid through the state. And so when that happens, our lobbyist that we have on behalf of the Education Coalition Communities goes and provides testimony and attends those hearings. So in your packet, you see that written testimony. And then on the agenda 4C, we received on Friday an open letter to the governor on the risks of the statewide open enrollment. So Mayor, this is a little out of order, but we have Lisa Rappaport on the school board here who wanted to address.
Certainly.
So Lisa, if you want to come on this.
Thank you. So the letter is in your packet, and this is something that was drafted by the School Board Advocacy Network, which is a nonpartisan coalition of school boards all over the state. And I think the letter pretty well outlines a lot of the confusion and broad objections to this bill. I think for us in Portsmouth, there are a wide variety of unanswered questions that would be potentially devastating for our budgets for operating schools, potentially shifting a lot of extra costs onto local taxpayers, and also creating an unprecedented amount of chaos in our ability to plan curriculum, to plan services, and to support kids in our buildings. For us in particular, this poses problems for our area agreements with SAU 50, which are surrounding school districts that pay tuition under pre-signed contracts that are in effect. And this law could potentially create some unclear conflict with those existing conflicts. We also have our alternative high school that is embedded within PHS, at Lister Academy, which has a tuition model and receives students from other districts, and we're unclear whether this would impact or how it would impact our ability to continue those tuition agreements. So for all of those reasons, and probably many more, we are working hard in opposition to this, and the letter's in the packet. I don't know if there's questions about it, but I've been definitely trying my best to follow all of the evolving pieces of this. It may be coming to a vote next Thursday, and potentially getting to the governor very quickly after that, which is an unusual parliamentary mechanism, which maybe Jane can explain, but I'm not sure I fully understand.
I actually have never heard.
It's new.
I've never heard of this particular provision. There were no hearings. It was a non-germane amendment, and then it passed, and now it is being fast-tracked without a hearing and potentially a vote on the House side this Thursday, and then it can go straight to the governor. I haven't drilled down on reviewing that process, but I don't know if there was a rule change that they adopted?
No, they attached it to a bill that already had a hearing.
Okay,
So that way they said, well, the bill's already had a hearing.
because there's notice,
Yes.
notice.
And usually the amendments get a hearing when they're in committee, but it was already on the floor.
Okay, so it was amended on the floor.
So I guess I have a couple of questions because it is quite confusing to follow this bill. I guess some of them, I guess I'll start with the questions that are specific to Portsmouth and then kind of branch out. But if this were to pass, would we be able to enact policy to prevent any of our students leaving through an SAU that's currently within an agreement?
Theoretically, yes. And one thing that several of the districts around the state and on the seacoast are looking at is whether, if this passes, we would be in a position to pass a policy that ultimately is a zero in, zero out policy, where we would agree as a collective group of school districts in the region that we will all take 0 students and send out 0 students to preserve the
The balance,
budgeting and
yeah.
planning predictability. Now,
Jeez
we're not
Louise.
100% sure if the final version of the bill will have a mechanism that makes that approach feasible or legal, because it's a little bit wide open. Short of that, I think the idea of the bill as drafted is that each district can set the number of students that they want to send in or out. Bless you. We're not 100% sure if we can do it by building, or if we would have to say our total elementary seats are X number of seats, or if we'd be able to drill down and say New Franklin, for example, has no more space, but we're willing to accept students at Little Harbor where there's space. We just don't know. So I'm not really sure if I answered your question, but we may be able to.
So it's confusing whether or not some of the supporters of the bill, at least I've read through their op-eds, that that would be possible, but that might not be the actual mechanisms of the bill. That's a fair
I
way.
think that's a fair way to look at it.
I guess second would, do we know how much transportation makes up of as a cost for the to educate a student? Meaning, like, we get 80% of the cost, and that's a cost borne by the district, so ourselves, in terms of educating, but we don't get paid we don't get paid 20%. Is that, like, how much does transportation cost to educate a student on an annual basis?
I don't have the exact answer to that. I see Nathan with a calculator in the corner. But I will say the bill does not have provisions to compensate for transportation at this time. So if I made a decision as a Portsmouth resident to send my student to Exeter, Dover,
would have
Oyster
to.
River, theoretically, right now, the way the bill's drafted, that would be on me as a parent to drive my child or figure that out. Where it becomes more confusing is for special education, where as part of students' individual plan, they are entitled to busing. And then it's a little murky right now which district would own those busing costs.
Okay. And then I think the end result is if this were enacted and there was room in Portsmouth, we would take or have a policy that accepted students, we would likely take, or we would be a desirable place based on the at least the lists that I've seen of our school and the job that our teachers do across the board in terms of elementary, middle school, and high school. Many other communities do not enjoy that same level of education standard and would all of a sudden kind of end up in a death spiral of losing students and increased costs. So when a community loses a student, they don't lose the responsibility to pay for that student, but they lose the money that they would have otherwise received. Is that a reasonable?
So for the sending district, right now, they would be required to pay 80 to 100% of the cost of educating in the receiving district. So a student comes to us from Exeter, Dover, Oyster River, they would have to pay 80 to 100% of our cost per pupil. But then what will happen to us over time is, let's just say we get 20 kids and our fixed costs are the same, our cost per pupil will go down. So each year that we add more kids, we would receive less for those kids. And on the flip side, for the sending district, as they're losing kids,
Their costs go up.
their costs are going up. So it's potentially very destabilizing for both the sending and the receiving district in terms of planning services and budget.
Nathan, in your former school administrator, has this been tried in previous years? I don't recall this sort of open enrollment.
There's been an open enrollment mechanism on the
Sure.
books forever, but there's very little. The charter school movement that started in earnest in the early 2000s with the federal planning grants and the state support of that, that came the closest. And back then, initially the conversation was exactly the same. It was students leave, their money follows them, but there's no savings to be generated in the sending district or the resident district. And over time, I think the state adjusted the funding mechanisms to make that less of a crippling impact on the resident districts, but still supporting and empowering, at least to some level, charter education. This is just
So what's the
enormous.
difference between what we have and what this proposes?
Well, right now, we have the education freedom accounts, which.
No,
if you
sorry,
look-
but we
I'm sorry.
have open enrollment, like within the state as I understand it, like are we allowed not to, aren't you allowed to go to other districts?
Allowed, yes, but to my knowledge, you would have to apply to that school and they can say yes or no, and there would be tuition that the family is paying directly to that school. And then if you apply for the education freedom accounts, which are essentially vouchers, you get a fixed amount of money, which is the same independent of the tuition that that school wants to bill you. I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think it's maybe around 5,000-ish for general education and about 7,000 if you have a student in special education. So it's not covering the full cost.
So this just ties the tuition you pay to the open, or like ties what the city, ties it to the city responsible for sending.
Yes.
Councilor Good?
I've never seen a vouchers program set up like this, and I think it's because of our, because of the way we fund education in New Hampshire. Most states have a higher state contribution, so kids just carry their state contribution. So yeah, the district doesn't get the state contribution, but they don't have the kid either. So it doesn't as frequently impact the school district that loses students, except that you have declining enrollment. New Hampshire is just very unusual because the tuition that the state pays, 4,000 something, is not enough to cover even close to tuition at a receiving district. And so they're trying to find a way to make it easier for families to go to a different district. And since the state's not gonna kick in adequate funding to fund education per pupil, they want the district where they're leaving to pay. So, but other states don't have this issue. I can't think of another example of this happening. I kind of did a deep dive into vouchers at some point, because the funding mechanism doesn't exist like this anywhere else.
Yes, and of the what is the revenue source for the $4,000 that's spent currently?
Education Trust Fund?
The Education Trust Fund.
It's actively being depleted by the private school voucher program.
Is there action on this letter, or is this more of an FYI?
I think it's informational,
Yes.
and we do have opposed to the bill if we can ever find how to access,
The bill.
to send it to, yeah, but.
There's this quite a robust list of open questions was this put together by the superintendent that did the letter?
That was put together by the School Board Advocacy Network, so mostly school board chairs from around the state were bringing all of the questions that were coming back from their individual districts.
And was this delivered to?
Yes, it was sent to all of the legislators and the governor's office, and I believe there's probably another 100 or so signatures since I sent that copy to you.
And so sending any district can, if we believe they can prevent students from leaving?
Technically, the way that it's drafted right now, there's a belief among school districts that we have the option to set the number of students we would let leave and the number of students that we would be willing to receive. If we proceed with this idea of hypothetically setting it to 0, it seems very possible that there would be some disagreement about that approach and some sort of legal process that would play out. But as it's drafted, it doesn't feel like there's anything specifically that prohibits that if that's how a district chooses to respond.
if we step aside from the city model that we have of governance or of legislative action, and you instead look at these smaller towns and school districts, they are creating, they think, I mean, I would say this, they haven't told me this, but they are creating the legal conversation that if the annual meeting, which is the one time when the voters speak, if the annual meeting says, this is our wish, we won't do this, we'll set this at 0, we won't give, we won't receive, we won't send, we won't receive, that will establish for them some legal standing to argue against what the law would allow, and you'll get a conflict of one law versus another effectively. I guess if I can say it that way, I'm not a lawyer, but
It'll challenge,
but
yeah.
I haven't heard anybody make a really solid argument that they have the right to set a number necessarily, because I haven't heard anybody give the legal argument, but it sure seems clear that they're creating a mechanism by which they could argue. Otherwise, you wouldn't necessarily have anything to stand on, so.
Yeah, I think they're trying to do it in their meeting days, as we've set our budget, and our budget is based on this enrollment projection for the next year.
Yep.
Type of mechanism.
That'd be just, I mean, outside of this would be interesting to know is how many schools within the state have capacity to take on extra students. Just given the fact that seemingly our average cost of education has gone up as our average or our number of student population has gone down, it would be quite interesting to know like where that actually, where that comes out and what schools are feeling that reduction in students. Another way of saying is like our average cost of education going up. It's in direct result to our housing and affordability crisis, making it very difficult to start a family in the state of New Hampshire and to send students to the schools. Well, thank you, Chair. Report. It's I'm assuming you'll be testifying on this as it presents at Concord.
At this time, no hearings are scheduled, but yes,
Okay.
if I find out about one in time to attend.
And so it's chance that they don't have a hearing because it's on a Senate
Correct.
bill that was already amended, was amended on the floor, and so then it would be voted on in the House. What bill is that? Is it a non-germane? It's a non-germane amendment. What bill was that?
751?
7.
What was that bill having to do with?
Yeah, establishes a committee
Is
to
it
study
751 that we're
licensure.
still talking about?
It's around that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so 751 came out, so the Parents' Bill of Rights, this is just anecdotally, I'm not sure I'm the expert in any way the best voice, but when the Parents' Bill of Rights was passed in the last session, one of the potentially unintended consequences was a real concern about videotaping.
Oh, yeah.
Right, that's good.
Yeah.
Across the board, in the classroom, on the athletic field, in the concert, in the gym, so that wasn't the intent, says the legislature, and so they established 751 to make that clear. But that whole concept of videotaping is now a sentence of basically footnote in the bill that was co-opted by open enrollment, so it
That's
went.
isn't that a great example, that a bill that they made that kept people from videotaping our high school basketball team from the stands, made it, that unintended consequences, they co-opted that bill to stick another bill in there that may have a few bigger and greater unintended consequences in there.
The videotaping bill actually did pass under a separate process, and we are now unsure if we can broadcast graduation, among other challenging consequences. But thank you. I just wanted this to be information and for us
Sure,
to have the
super
opportunity to
helpful.
coordinate on this.
I have a crazy question about the videotaping rules now. Can we not broadcast school games on Channel 22 anymore?
It's currently being assessed.
Yeah, I think that,
That's a different thing because that is a freedom of the press issue because it's still a public event, so a journalist would have the ability to go and do that. Whether we as a district can broadcast is a separate question.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is
With that now, we'll turn it over to the mayor. There have been several written testimony from the mayor's group. Two bills were relative to risk pools. As you know, that was a big legislative issue last year. This year, there are two bills that the mayor's group supported, both of which acknowledging and identifying two different types of risk pools that can be an accessible and a non-accessible risk pool. And one of the other bills gives a longer time in the event of an assessment to pay any particular assessment. Most of you are aware of the challenge of various risk pools, school care and health trust. One's sort of an apple, the other is an orange as far as their structure is concerned. And so this bill confirms the two types of risk pools, and the mayor's group basically supported both of those. I thought it was important for the committee to know that.
Yeah, for those that were in attendance, so still don't have Jay Ruwe on there. Would not have been applicable to him regardless because they are self-insured in that sense. But those
That's
that
in Nashua, right?
Nashua
In Manchester.
did not support those, and then Rochester. I don't think Rochester didn't do it, but it did have bipartisan support. Not that anybody's partisan, but Mike Bordas from Laconia, who is a Republican member of the House, and was supportive of this. I think the understanding for and even Concord has they signed on to them, although they do not make the decision because Concord their school board is independent of them in terms of financially raising the money, but worked with them, and I know that the Concord school board was very connected with that, so that was a positive thing that they were able to get. I think the broad consensus is just a confusion of what the hell is going on with these on the state, and why these are coming with such a shock. If they are in fact risk pools, we should be operating from the standpoint of the benefactor of these, and business decisions shouldn't be made at our at our cost in order to continue to stay afloat. So I was excited to see that, and there was another one on the right to know that was largely supported by everyone, I believe, again, and then I guess it's just defining citizen of New Hampshire to break it down as simply as we can, citizen of the United States. If there are things that you would like to bring to the Mayor's Committee, we meet every month, and happy to bring anything up if you think that there's consensus. I would say the things that are effective are ones that are, reasonable or unreasonable, but where there's an opportunity, they're not like ideological Republican Democrat issues, but more like where there's been success in the past is or where like there wasn't success. This is the housing champions. There was even though we agree that as mayors, and I'm picking on just Mr. Bortles there, that we agree that there's top-down approach in terms of mandating zoning is not going to be effective as incentives, and this is an incentive. There was view, I think, within Concord that this was, something different than that. But as long as we can find ways to make things as nonpartisan and speak to the fact that this is just unreasonable, we can get the support of this, and it helps to do that before they become larger political issues. You could probably, in retrospect, to think about this if any of us had thought the Housing Champions Fund was gonna be kind of on the chopping block, you know, with such a small amount of money, and going to, you know, we didn't get any money, but Concord, I think, got like $800,000 for an infrastructure project that I think is now at risk because of the repeal and the potential clawback of funds. So it's helpful to act earlier and set the stage of it being nonpartisan.
Thank you. And now we have, the bill list, I think is probably something we should take a look at. That's probably attached to your agenda. I think we had it up on the screen. So what's nice now is we can click on the link and that should help us all, you know, track these. So I'll just go through, the ones that, again, these are just a recommendation. This is not, you know, but most of these bills are in committee, and we can provide to the committee directly, but many of them have had their hearings already, many of these on this list, but we certainly can weigh into committee members before it comes out to the House floor and certainly our delegates. So there are 3 bills relative to making changes to the law last year where residential development is permitted on commercially zoned property. So those 3 bills are House Bill 1010, House Bill 1065, and House Bill 1349. And I know that the city, and particularly the council, is very committed to creating housing and expanding our housing inventory and supporting workforce housing. So I listed those 3 bills that would limit, you know, actually remove small towns from having to comply with with the new law and change the law so that they would not have to.
Question on 1349. I saw that the sponsors were, this is sometimes where some of this redistricting can play with Representative Muse and Representative Mandelbaum, who are also our representatives, were the sponsors of this bill. I know that they do also serve as representatives for a small community, Newington. But I mean, I guess I would like a conversation with them about this bill, maybe within this committee, because it is the exact opposite of what, and I understand that it's for small communities, but I think, at least for me, we, in my opinion, have to remove the burden of housing from solely larger communities. And I think that a lot of the larger communities are feeling that burden, and a lot of smaller communities are saying, well, we don't have the infrastructure, we can't do this. Instead of investing in infrastructure and forward-thinking motions to alleviate some of the pressure from other communities. So I think it would just be nice, because I can see this, you know, what is to say that the next amendment doesn't say communities under 20,000 people or under 10,000 people, which a majority of our communities in the state, smaller towns, are sub 10,000 people. So I just worry that this could potentially be a runaway train. So I would love to speak to them about that.
So should I ask them to participate in the next, let's say, subcommittee meeting? Is that something that you'd be in?
I would be interested in that if anyone else would be.
Yes, I think that would be great, or at a minimum, if
Just
for
a
some reason we're
question
not gonna be scheduled in time, sending them a letter,
Yeah,
maybe?
I even a written response is fine with me.
Yeah.
A question, just,
The majority of their constituents live in Portsmouth.
I will be happy to follow
Just
up.
on this bill, it's, so it's for, just exempts them from the commercial zoned.
no, from the multi-family.
Okay, so the next one on the list to take a look at is obviously oppose repealing the housing champion, but I think that went to vote already, right?
It did,
That
and it got,
idea.
it got.
Yep.
Wait, this passed, I thought. Passed the
A
House.
repeal, excuse me, it's like a double negative.
Yes.
It passed the House,
It passed, yeah, so now it'll be
on to the Senate.
to oppose it as it crosses over. And then the next one would be, this is one, I took some of the housing bills and spoke with our planning director, Peter Britz. And this particular one would allow an architect to make a determination as to whether or not the density is consistent with the neighborhood, which would, I think, really be a little problematic to, in theory, probably a good idea, but very problematic to enforce, and there's absolutely no appeal from that architect's decision, unlike a ZBA decision where you can say, no or yes. But again, this is just a suggestion, but I think it was sort of like taking the idea of the third-party inspector for a building, which again, I think is a great idea, but the devil was in the details, at least as how this was written. So that's why this was listed as opposed. And then House Bill 1461 was the one that extends sewer system, which again would suggest or encourage municipalities to do so, which is wonderful. There is only a provision of the bill, though, that says if it's deemed important, DS can require a municipality to do it. And I think it was the emergency, and some of that could be housing, which would be great, but we have agreements with towns, we negotiate those, and so this would remove local control. So that's why that one's listed as opposed. Housing Champion, Senate Bill 419, that's just a big green S for support. And then those are housing related bills. The next list is about just general municipal bills. And so our welfare director alerted me to House Bill 348, the eligibility for local assistance. It requires now proof of residency and documentation, which in the first instance is very challenging. So that's one of the reasons there is a concern. The second area of concern is that places like Manchester and Portsmouth that have services oftentimes, have documentation for their folks that reside here that are proof of residency. What happens now is if you go to a different town and you're no longer at Crossroads or whatever, then that town is then responsible. The way this is written,
If that is your,
yeah, that wouldn't be the case. Portsmouth would still be responsible because of the residency documentation, notwithstanding the fact that a person had left. So again, that's why and I think the Association of Welfare Directors were opposing it for that particular reason. We already spoke at length about House Bill 751, which was the choice, the school choice, not the school choice, the open enrollment. And then there was concern on House Bill 1002 because that bill is repealing the solar energy system tax exemption, which is concerning for all the incentives that the council has supported throughout the last several years. So that's listed as opposed. House Bill 1184 is that no trespass bill that came back. Was it last year or the year before the committee discussed it? It made a very difficult process to issue a no trespass order. I believe it required a hearing of the legislative body. And as you know, sometimes, we don't always meet every week or what have you. And then there were concerns relative to the complexity of the process. Not that there couldn't be, certainly consideration for a different process, but the way it was written would be extremely, extremely difficult for local cities and towns to issue the no trespass. House Bill 1195, zoning requirements for child daycare providers. That's, I believe that's the tax credit one. Oh, no, that's the zoning one, which would make it easier for folks to have at-home daycare. I think you can have one in an accessory dwelling unit, so that one was support. NHMA is a bit more received. It's as are lobbying groups that support municipalities. So that's why House Bill 1359 and 1360 are listed as opposed. And then
Including our own coalition communities 2.0.
Exactly. And so that would be, it makes it more challenging for how we pay for dues associated with various coalitions, particularly for towns, because it's town meeting. The child care tax credit is House Bill 1433, so that's support. And then the opposition is, I think the mayor has mentioned this earlier in the meeting, 1474, which is the meals and rooms distribution, which would really upend distribution, particularly to small towns in the city of Portsmouth who have property-rich assessments because they do link it to value. And I think our distribution would be reduced by 2/3.
72%.
72%.
Where's that? Is that past the House?
I don't believe so. I believe it's still, it hasn't come out of committee yet. It hasn't gone to the floor vote.
So this is it's an executive session today at 11 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah. This
So-
is one of the most dangerous bills, I think, for us.
Right, it
Right
really
now.
is concerning financially and precedentially, I mean, I think the mayor, how many times have you testified on the issue of meals and rooms in your tenure? I mean, a
Sure.
lot.
Yeah.
And so that's quite concerning. It's in the House and again, it almost tracks exactly to the coalition communities that would have the majority of.
Yeah, I was
the
interested, but it wasn't
Yeah.
tied at all to
No,
education
it's
funding.
not tied to education, but it's just how the math works.
There's the other one tied to.
Those of us that would lose in meals and rooms are the same folks that are sitting on excess SWEP generally.
Yeah.
So that's how it mirrors.
There is another bill that is tied to education funding, isn't there? That redistributes SWEPT. That does the same thing. It's a homestead exemption and then it redistributes SWEPT based upon the new property.
Did that make it out of committee?
I don't think so. There were two bills last week we were tracking, and we got up literally this morning at 8, we got a new list from the lobbyist on the CC2. If you open your emails, I think there's a chart that Nathan can speak to as we move forward. We spoke already about Senate Bill 605 and House Bill 1491 about the risk pools. We're supportive of those. And then Council Cook noted the House Bill 1580, which is taxation for non-primary residents. The reason that she suggested that this be supported is that that tax money goes to the municipality for those for those non-primary residences.
Versus 1786, where it's kind of spread in different pockets.
Yeah, 1786, it's interesting, 1786, I think the intent is really good.
Yeah.
It goes back to the state to fund all these housing incentive programs.
But doesn't trickle directly.
But it
down
doesn't
to
go
the
directly
pockets.
to the municipality, and my concern there is if we start giving our second home, if we get a second home tax or a non-primary residence tax, and we start sending that money to the state, that money will never come back to municipalities. And the state is incentivized right now to start eliminating those programs, so then they just get the tax money and they eliminate all the housing programs that are associated with it. That's my concern. So I think the intent there is very good, and I think it's a great bill in a different political environment. So, but that's why I was looking, I like the idea of getting to keep the money, especially if we're gonna lose rooms and meals.
I like how the bill that you said we should support has a lot of, has not a lot, but has some guidelines in there about value. So it's, it's, and it says right in here, if things are winterized, so it's, if you have your little cabin, wow. If you have like a little you know, there's a cabin over on Milton Three Ponds that is a modular home that you winterize, you know, assessed under $500,000, you don't have to worry about that. This is really to target some of the luxury homes that we see and just secondary luxury market of those with much more expendable out-of-state transient income.
And then, we're supporting the homestead property tax exemption in
Is
the
that the one you're
house.
talking about, Counselor Cook?
So
No, I don't think that one's
No.
an education one. Can you?
it's not an education one, but I wanna talk a little bit about this one,
1648?
because
1648, yeah.
I love the idea of a homestead property tax exemption,
Mm-hmm.
but
Let's go
the
down. Let's see.
bigger picture on that
Subcommittee
is
works.
that communities, like say, look at Rockham County. So if everybody in Rockingham County who has a homestead can deduct 300,000 off their valuation, on the surface, that looks like it really does benefit our homeowners who are kind of lowest income and are already getting a deduction for disability or being older, they might end up paying any property taxes. But the end effect is we have a lot of residents in Portsmouth that still have a significant valuation that they're paying taxes on. And there are whole communities whose valuations are completely wiped out by this. And so they end up not paying property taxes or not being considered in valuation is my concern at the county level. So I don't see what, I'm questioning
Would this
how this
affect on
impacts
the,
our county.
would this affect
taxation.
on the county tax, or this would be for local assessing?
Is it local assessment only, or is it?
It's right here. Keep going down.
Talking about 1648, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not really clear
Yeah,
on
okay.
1648. I mean, on the surface, it sounds great, but.
Yeah.
Portion of statewide valuation.
Looks like it's just to swept.
So this is my concern about this one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
So-
just a SWEPT.
It
So
looks
this
like
is
it's just a SWEPT.
This is an education funding bill.
This is the education funding bill. So this one I'm concerned about because essentially it redistributes swept taxation to communities with higher valuations. And whole communities whose valuations are under 300,000, which there aren't a lot of them, but half of the community might be under 300,000,
It's 1648.
are exempted then from swept.
So then that should be opposed
Well,
or attractive.
Well,
or
Track,
we
I
should have a
guess-
discussion about it at least.
That might be in conflict, and I don't know if it made the list for the Coalition Communities 2.0.
I had a long discussion with one of the sponsors about this, and they were all excited about it because it redistributes swept to communities with higher valuations. And I'm like, wait a second. And they're like, oh, but your people who have low income are already getting a deduction. I'm like,
They're not.
no, they're not.
Not significantly, no.
No. And so I'm really concerned about people who don't have a huge deduction, who are living in neighborhoods that their property valuation's 500,000. So they still have 200,000, whereas there's somebody over in Newfields or in whose valuation is 300,000. They make 200,000 a year. This person makes $60,000 a year. They're going to be paying more in swept than the person in Newfields, whose income is significantly higher. There are a lot of these communities whose property, their swept is going to go down significantly, yet their relative incomes are much higher than ours because we're 75th in the state. So we already have a lot of people who are house poor. So I'm worried about that redistribution. And I don't know, it doesn't say it impacts state or
It just seems.
doesn't say it
to swept.
impacts county taxation, but does it? Because it says for statewide valuation.
Subject to the uniform, stay with it, yes, subject to, so all properties, is that just exclusionary, like utilities aren't, you know what I mean?
But then it
Yeah.
says the DRA shall calculate the tax warrant,
So that
and that's only for the
implicates
state's
that
portion,
swept.
not for county or
Yeah,
for local.
yeah.
So
What would it, I guess, what would this mean for Portsmouth on the 300,000 if we took this out on the SWEPT? So this is not for the general government. This is only for the
The
portion
portion of the,
SWEPT.
if you take away from a portion of the pie, that other portion needs to be made up somewhere else. It seems like the local tax would go up, Nathan, like, thinking, right?
No, I think
No, commercial would
the,
go.
well,
No, I mean, for purposes of funding the school board,
so
if we didn't have a tax base contributing to the overall swept tax, then would it artificially increase the local education tax because we need to fund our school, and that's what I'm not sure, and we're looking at.
Nathan's brains.
Nathan's brain is,
isn't, when they divvy it up and they, the statewide property tax is $1.12 a thousand, but it's not necessarily $1.12 when we feel it, because it's, isn't it spread against equalized? Wow, clearly I haven't done this enough, because it feels like if you exempt 300,000 and below,
right,
it all rises up. I'm gonna say, aren't
Would
I, am I not
increase
going to,
swept?
I'm gonna raise the same amount of swept, I'm just gonna,
less people are gonna,
less people are gonna
They're paying
contribute to it. It's
Right.
not like
So
that
we're paying more.
rolls over, yeah, anybody, the home value, home and business, the value that was beyond 300,000 would just pay more. Because I don't think it rolls over into the local, I think you have to raise that amount of swept.
for the swept.
But it has to be done on an equal dollar amount. So our average in Portsmouth, our average home price is what, or like
It went to $1 million
Seven-
less.
$770? It's $770, so it would take it to, it would take 300,000 off the bottom of that. And so 440 or 470 would then be calculated by swept. And that number, that swept number would then increase, like
Yeah,
on
per,
a dollar amount.
On a dollar amount
Yes.
basis here
Yes.
in Portsmouth.
Here in Portsmouth,
Right.
yes.
But
Yes.
other communities whose valuations are a lot lower,
That's right.
well, the only thing I'm thinking, and I apologize, not a math person, but they set how much the whole state needs to raise, what is it? Like
363 million.
360 million, so the value, and that's based on valuation, and then they set that tax rate.
Right.
So yeah, it would seem like you're cutting off 300,000 of valuation everywhere. And so, yeah, it seems like it would be an increase in the swept rate alone to make that difference and not affect the local, now that you say it, yeah.
Because they break it up, they can tell us a year ahead, we're gonna raise 11,029,000 in swept here. So if you change the nature of the value against which we raise that, it
Yeah.
doesn't change the amount we raise, it just changes
The rate.
The rate.
The swept rate.
I had a discussion with Representative Luneau, Merrimack, and he's one of the sponsors. And his comment was, well, SWEP's only 10% of Portsmouth's education taxation anyway. And it's relatively low for Portsmouth. So I don't know why you're worried about this. So yes, it's gonna go up some for you, but my taxes are really high too. And kind of like, well,
It's not gonna reduce his taxes, really,
no, but Merrimack would be a town that would benefit.
the town in itself,
Yeah.
because the value of the houses.
Right, exactly. So this is the challenge, is that
Yeah.
The majority of communities in this state would probably benefit from this. Whereas the communities on the seacoast would take another hit. Those with higher valuations, Seacoast, Keene, there are some communities that would be disproportionately negatively impacted. And you can determine that from looking at the sponsors too, so. So,
So we'll just track that one perhaps rather than support or oppose, is that?
Let's try to do the numbers if we can by tomorrow, to get a sense of what that actually would do. I guess I'm opposed to it from a standpoint of it hurting Portsmouth. I want to if there's a number that we could suggest that would be different than the 300,000, that would be more in line with something that SWEPT, if SWEPT is the only thing that will ever get done in terms of funding education in the state, want to be in a position as Portsmouth that is proposing solutions for this, since the Coalition Communities has kind of run the gamut in the legal sense. And so a lot of this is going to be legislative work. And so if there's a way to figure out a number that would be reasonable for that Portsmouth could stand behind, then we'd like to know what that number is.
Perhaps 100,000 as opposed to 300, is that what you mean? And therefore.
I would think it would go
more-
up. Well, I honestly will probably end up going the other way, because like I think that the I would just be very curious in terms of like what, I know this is a lot of work in terms of like what the number is, like right now under, like what the number would be under the total that we have to raise under the court order, you know, because right now what we're talking about $35 million that's pushed out throughout the state in terms of adequacy. But like what that would mean if like we actually net the court number, like what that number would be, and then like what this impact would have on the larger number, that $7,000 number that we're talking about. Councilor Cook?
I just think that there's gotta be a different way to do this. You know, exempting $300,000 in property values in communities where the average income is extremely high, but their property values are low, is not necessarily a fair way to distribute taxation for education. So I think that we have to be thinking about an alternative method of doing this. I realize that property taxes are our only vehicle currently in the state of New Hampshire, but I think we're looking for a solution to a problem that Concord is creating right now by eliminating business taxes. That we could be looking at business taxes instead of trying to come up with solutions with additional property taxation.
Nathan?
I'm just reading the definition of the SWEPT. The state, the tax rate that is established at the state level is applied to equalized valuations without utilities to achieve a minimum amount that needs to be raised by the state. Based upon your equalized valuation, which is all in, and I don't see that this would change that mechanism.
Calculation.
They identify that we have to raise $11 million. And then when we locally assess a tax levy for that component of our assessment, we have to raise that $11 million against a property base. And if you excluded a piece of that base, the 11 million would simply be raised on the remainder of the, and when I say base, I mean properties. And so properties under 300,000 would no longer be assessed that portion of the tax. So we'd have to raise the 11 million off the remainder of the tax base that was beyond 300,000. So if I opine a concept, take a community somewhere in the North Country where there are 100 properties, but only 2 of them are valued beyond 300,000. Those 2 are each valued at 500,000, and they have to raise 100 grand. All of the properties less those 2 would be exempted, and so those 2 would have to raise the 100 grand, because that's just a piece, and that's not local and that's not county. That's just the piece of tax that has to be raised locally. And so if you have that exemption, for the purposes of the SWEPT, all but those 2 would be exempted, and you'd have to raise the $100,000. Does that make sense? So here, we would calculate our local tax component of school and of municipal and our county the way we always have, but this would have us exempt the first 300,000 of value from all eligible properties. So we would raise the same dollar amount. We would simply have to raise it spread across the rest of the community. not the first 300,000 of everybody's property.
So-
But we'll run the numbers for tomorrow to try to make that, give an example, make that make sense for us.
So I have no problem if it's done on a community basis. My concern is that if it is done on a redistribution basis. So if we're taking valuations out of calculation
Oh.
for other communities.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, so
Okay,
if
so
we're-
if it's lowering it versus another community, like, then that's not fair. But
Right.
if it's saying in your community, we can take the first $300,000 off, then we're, because like what ends up happening there, and it's, I don't know, so what happens if we take the first $300,000 off for primary residents that you suggest April 15th, you say, like, I live here. So if you live in Portsmouth and it's not a primary residence, then you pay more for education. If you live in Portsmouth or your building is in Portsmouth and it's commercial, it also is not a primary residence. So like this in effect for Portsmouth for SWEPT would, because we have a larger commercial base, would probably have a tendency of shifting it more to commercial
Right.
away from residential, which would, from a resident standpoint, be favorable. But your point, I think now I understand, is if this is how we're comparing each municipality by saying we're gonna take $300,000 off, then that's not necessarily a fair way to go, because it's gonna exacerbate the problem and create more focused donor towns, whereas previously, the path was to have, as the money went up in terms of adequacy, more donor towns versus less.
So if in
That's my
fact,
concern.
if in fact this meant that instead of 11 million, Portsmouth had to raise 30 million in SWEPT, then that's not, yeah.
Exactly, that's my concern. I'm not
But we have
really-
to chase it, we have to
Yeah,
chase
I'm
it down.
not really clear,
Yep,
the language,
absolutely.
and from talking to the sponsor, it seemed like he was thinking it redistributes SWEPT to towns who have higher property valuation. So that's what I wanna make sure that we're not,
Okay, so if the state comes and says, this is your property, Portsmouth, but then Portsmouth can come in and say, this is how we're going to carve up, who's responsible to pay for this, or this is your number, Portsmouth.
Yeah.
And this is our ability to, come up and say that then. Is this a local option, or is this just be everybody has to do it?
I think this is everybody.
yes, everybody has to do
And
it.
it's probably what Councilor Cook thinks.
Yeah, so I wanna double check, because he kept telling
They
me.
have to apply though,
Seek, yeah,
they have to apply,
Property owners.
yeah.
submit an application.
Oh, so they can't, I mean, how would they know, how would we be able to point out all the, like,
30 days.
the exemption under shall reduce the taxable assessed value of the property by the amount of the exemption, thereby lowering the property tax owed? For the individual or for the town?
Apparently for the individual, because not everybody's included, you have to apply.
Yeah,
So it makes it a bit more onerous as far as who.
right.
Does that jive with the timing of the assessments, Nathan, those deadlines for application? Because
I thought the tax base, we taxed against April 1, I thought. So this
So
is
that-
2 weeks too
that's like
late,
a-
that's next year.
that's a town, right.
That's really town date, not a.
Not a. Is that the end? Is there another page?
Yeah, I just wanna, please double check this. Cause this is truly not clear.
I mean, my read is right there, line 2.
Mhm.
This exemption shall not apply to properties that are rented, commercial, corporate, partnerships, or non-resident, because those are the groups that are gonna pay more. But we need clarification, because if this is a change at the level at which the responsibility to raise SWEPT is established,
Mm-hmm.
then we could be talking about redistributing the swept burden all over the state.
Yep.
And that would certainly have a southeastern direction in general, right? So, so if that's the case, yeah.
Yeah.
We need to be able to call that out. Okay? So you don't wanna bring me next time. Get interested.
Okay, great, we'll run those numbers and, you know, we'll track it in the short term then, unless we have different guidance. Only a couple more left to discuss. Senate Bill 418, the Association of Health Inspectors opposed this bill. It removes local control from regulating homestead foods, which is something that is still necessary to regulate, just like any other food product for sale. The homestead foods, things that people make small batches, you're not sort of a commercial. A lot of, I think some of the things that we sell at the farmer's market are classified as homestead. You can click on it. Yeah. Click on the bill.
Cause right now, you have to get a home kitchen.
Yeah, there's
Approved
a
for-
process by
yeah.
which you have to get the thumbs up for producing whatever the food is, just like restaurants
Yeah.
or any
It's
other
like
type.
commissaries, all of that.
So this would exempt all of those types of small batch, I guess I would use as a code to describe that. And the concern from all the health inspectors is it's more common than you think, and just like any other food that goes to the public, it's something that needs particular criteria, but you would not be able to do that.
It's
So it
funny that
removes
they,
local
the
control.
broad sweep instead of, I mean,
This is the pickle bill?
Homestead food
Yeah.
operation means a
Yeah.
person who produces homestead food products,
Yes,
excluding potentially hazardous food, only in the home kitchen of that person's primary residence in New Hampshire. So I thought it was gonna give us an example or a list. Food purposes.
but it's funny cause there's already laws and exemptions and rules for like small farms, right? They go into their own
Mhm.
regulations. So this is really, and I think a lot of more times the farmers market are actually small businesses versus, well, at least in ours, I know it's different. To me, this is more like the people on the side of the road selling bread where you put your couple, which I always get it when I drive to Warner, there's one lady, there's my $10, I'll take a sourdough. Interesting, but I can understand, I do think it's also worth noting in our, not every community has their own health inspections department. A lot of times they are reliant on the state to go in, the same with liquor committee, you know what I mean? Portsmouth is one of the only municipalities that has their own. It's interesting.
I don't think that we currently regulate this though, in Portsmouth.
I believe that our health department does.
Cause I asked on the pickle thing, cause it didn't seem like we did when that news broke like a year ago. So I'm just curious.
My understanding is you're trying to sell, and just because we had a home baker approach us about cakes, and I was like, do you go through the city? And that person said no, and I said, then I cannot sell them here. Would love to partner with you, cannot. Maybe in our new location.
Picklegate bill.
When was that, last year?
No, it's a week ago. So they're
Oh,
they're
okay.
they're talking, they're using it again.
Oh, yeah, cause I
418?
don't,
Yeah, 418.
Yeah.
So-called pickle bill.
it's the same thing.
What is the, can we just see what the amended language would look like?
That's it.
And then, after paragraph 3, the
Oh, I
new
see.
paragraph.
So go to 143A12,
That's what I was reading. Wrong
NH
keyword.
Gen Court.
Boom, boom,
There you go,
comes up.
there you go. You just had it.
Yeah, I just had it online, 143.
service license.
That doesn't look right. 140.
No, that makes sense.
A12, oh, it's 143A, sorry.
Yeah.
Hit the wrong button.
There
I'll let
it
you,
is.
I'll let y'all know on the
Food
joke.
service license.
The way my bifocals, trifocals, whatever
There you
work, I
go,
can
right
almost
there.
not see any
Up
of what I'm
12,
looking at.
homestead food
12
license.
homestead food, there you go.
So effective until November 12, 2025, go below. There you go.
So where should I start reading here?
And they're
Don't go away, let me look back, where's the bill that I just was at? 34, that's not the one. 34A12, oh, it's generic, it didn't give us a specific. Calls out freeze dry.
farmers markets or to a restaurant.
So basically,
Labeling.
Yeah, this product is made in a residential food production area licensed by the New Hampshire Department of Health.
so we'd be eliminating that label requirement.
Okay, so here's what I don't, this is so number 3. Homestead food operations that wish to sell food products excluding potentially hazardous food to restaurants or other food establishments over the internet. So what does that mean? Like, homestead food operations selling food excluding,
Like brownies to a
Yeah,
restaurant.
it means like I can't bake any of the stuff that I sell at Cup of Joe at home.
so like this, under this, except the department may inspect when the department has a reason to suspect imminent health hazard as defined in, so like, I guess like why is this, does the state already license this?
Products made by homestead food operations exempt from licensure shall be labeled with the following. So I think there's lists of types of foods that are exempt and types of food that might not be exempt. We're a self-inspecting municipality, unlike most of the towns and cities which are not. So there's a distinction between towns go through the state and we inspect ourselves. So I think that might be what we're also talking about, that we are a self-inspecting municipality like a lot of the other cities. But I think, why don't I reach out, we could spend time going down on this. Let's just track until, and we can get more clarification from our health department on the concerns on this.
So
So we can,
my read is it's an exemption from all the licensing requirements.
Right,
Right.
but they define it as hazardous food or not hazardous food.
and that's defined in the food code, and I don't really know. And maybe because pickles, they have a fermenting process, that might be defined as a hazardous food, but I don't know enough about
Nobody's dying from
the food code to
What?
opine on that. So we'll reach back out to health and track in the meantime. And then the last two, support the Housing Champion Bill, Senate Bill 419. And then Senate Bill 490, there's a task force creation to study housing at peace, and that would be something I would assume that the city and the council would support. And everything else is just that.
Mayor, I have two that I would like us to support instead of track.
Sure.
On the very first page at the bottom, House Bill 1303, authorizing municipalities to adopt zoning ordinances related to protection, management, and replacement of tree canopy. This is basically allows municipalities to take action around the tree ordinance, and both the Sustainability Committee and the Historic District Commission are interested in having some kind of tree ordinance. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to pass a tree ordinance, but it just gives us the ability to do so if we chose to do so. And I would say that this is consistent with our sustainability goals in the Climate Action Plan, because trees are the largest carbon sink in a municipality, so.
Okay, why was this outside of our legislative principles? I mean, it would be on there now because it's like sense of place, I guess, the lived world, right?
Or as amended,
Amended legislative principles.
yeah, the amendment that we just had was the natural, environment, support the natural
Okay,
environment,
that
natural built
seems
environment.
like it's a support under that.
I don't know if we'll adopt anything, but it gives us the ability. And the,
That's changing.
Yep, the T to an S for HB 1303.
and then on your third page at the very bottom, voluntary surcharge to fund the Council on the Arts. I would ask that we support this one with the new legislative principle that we've adopted.
Okay.
And that is voluntary, so it allows your arts organizations or any organization to have a surcharge on ticket fees. It would go to the State Council on the Arts. And so because it's voluntary, they get to choose if they're gonna do that or not.
Who gets to choose?
The organizations. So if, say, the music hall said, I wanna add $1 to every ticket, it's not even $1, it's actually 50 cents, I think, is the max that they allow on every ticket sold to help fund the State Council on the Arts. So they could charge that surcharge and send the money to the State Council on the Arts. Any institution could choose to do that, but it is voluntary.
Just trying to tie it, under the supporting the businesses and, okay. That's good.
So do we need a motion to approve as amended the list?
Sure, I'd wait a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I'm so sorry, I do have, that's not really change that vote, but I was just curious, in terms of like 1303, I know other departments in the city are alerting us to things that are happening that are impacting them, is that fair? And is there instances where like Max might go up to Concord and on behalf of the city and, right,
Certainly.
okay, so it's not just on you or
Yeah, and
Right.
Jane facilitates, you know what I mean, where
Right.
she, you know, I know you've gone up with the welfare director and certain department
Right.
employees and heads and members of council. I mean, it, as I've learned, it really does make a difference when a person, sometimes doesn't really always matter who the person is, but a person coming representing the city and the residents makes a huge difference, especially in kind of like the minutia of what they hear in Concord. Sometimes it's nice to see a different face, a different voice representing the cause.
And what's also helpful is by, endorsing the slate of opposed, a lot of, if it falls on in the topic, then our clerk, for instance, right, or our, assessor could say when their board, their association is testifying, not only does the association support, but the city does as well, so they'll have that ability. Does that make sense?
yes, thank you.
Okay. I think that is all we
That
have.
passed? Yep, all right,
You voted on that? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So next meeting, I think, is what this committee should decide to,
Oh, what date?
or, when, the frequency. I think we wanted a report back from Representative Muse and Mandelbaum, certainly. I think,
Well, I think there's gonna be a lot of updates coming in, because a lot of
When
things
is
are going to.
crossover expected to happen?
That's right.
March 13th.
Yeah.
It'd be great to try to have one before March, before that crossover. date.
Before crossover, so like early March,
Yeah, the first week of March.
so the first Friday in March.
No?
That's a tough
And not
one.
work?
It's a tough one for me.
Okay,
Um,
6th.
I'm looking up when crossover is.
yeah.
I mean, they
It's
never
on the
know.
link on the agenda too.
I could definitely zoom in, I just have a class that starts, and so, but I could definitely
If you
zoom,
go
definitely
to,
zoom in.
yeah, there you go, yeah. And then go to either the House or the Senate calendar, the crossover date should be listed on the calendar. So if you go.
No.
If you go back, if you go back,
It's a
and
confusing
then go
website.
down the page
Actually,
considerably,
very
keep going, nope,
It's a
down
digital.
further. So the House calendar PDF, click that. And then click on that, the view PDF file. And it should say crossover dates, yeah, let's go.
Votes are, cause you can
Look up.
Crossover.
Crossover,
March 26th.
Yeah, hearing.
No,
No,
it's
March 26th.
But I- March 26th.
yes, no,
Yeah.
no, I wanna be able to see that.
March-
March 21st?
March
Sixth.
26th is
26th.
crossover.
26th? Oh, it's
So
late
could we
this
do the
year.
13th?
That's good. How does the
I can't
13th?
do the third.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I just can't do it until after like 10:30.
I'm not gonna be here, it's school vacation.
Oh, gosh,
It
okay.
is?
No, it's not, but I'm not gonna be here, it's
Okay.
not school vacation.
Should we try to
Or the 20th?
another day besides the, I'm not here the 20th,
Oh, you're not here the 20th.
but I am Zoomable. That's my spring break.
The
What
20th,
about the 12th? Are you here the 12th?
I'm not here
Oh,
that
you're
week.
not here, okay.
okay.
The
Um,
27th, is that too soon?
That's too late.
It's too late. The 27th of February, I'm sorry.
February.
Oh, that's probably too soon.
Too soon,
We,
yeah.
we wanna kind of track how some of these move.
How about the 16th of March?
I was just gonna say, I could do
Monday the
that,
16th?
I could do that Monday.
Alright,
A time to be determined depending on the availability of the room, but does
should be
8:30 work?
8:30.
8:30, I think works consistent for me.
All right, Monday, the 16th at 8:30, March 16th.
Switching it up, everyone's switching up from different days. Fair or bad,
It's historically been on Friday.
no, I feel like we had it on Thursday or Wednesdays, like 2 terms ago or something, I don't know.
Mondays and Fridays seem to be better because the house isn't usually in session.
Yeah, we used to have the delegates come, and I think we picked Friday over time, because then that was the day that they could sometimes come.
Yeah.
Ready, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.